I like the little voice that's like recording in progress. It's a cool job to have is making that. All right, hi everybody. This is Shortbox. We're really lucky today to have Ram V with us. Ram V has been gracious enough to give us some time to ask about some of the great stuff he's been working on. Ram V recently has been the creator of Critical Darling, Many Deaths of Laila Starr. He's worked on these Savage Shores, Graffity's Wall, Venom, Swamp Thing, so many cool things. So today we're just going to have a conversation about what it's like to create those things, what it's like to write some characters that have been in the public eye for decades, and also what it's like to come up with your own characters and your own stories and to have creator-owned content. And then we're just going to talk. This is just a couple of dudes chatting in their own basements or wherever they are, because with the blur, you don't know what's going on behind us. It could be bad, it could be good, but we're not going to go into that. So, let's introduce ourselves real quick. I'm Crow. I'm the head of marketing at Shortbox, head of marketing and community.
And I am Kevin. I do business development for Shortboxed. And prior to this, I managed a comic shop for a few years. I've read all Ram's stuff. I'm a huge fan. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ram. This is it's an honor to spend some time with you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And then, of course, Ram is Ram.
Yeah, I'm Ram, and I'm the guy who was lucky enough to be introduced by the other two people. So yeah,
we don't want you to do any work here. You've already created all the comics. We're just So let's dig into it. Ram, I guess the best way to start is to maybe if people are watching and they're not familiar with you, one, they're missing out already, but maybe give us a little insight into who you are.
Yeah,
origin story.
I've been writing comics since 2016, at least formally. I self-published my first book, which is called Black Mamba, back in 2015. And then since then, I've gone on to do work at Image. I've done work at Boom. I've done work at DC, Marvel. Pretty much run the gamut of publishers since then. Work that I'm probably best known for is on the creator-owned side is probably The Savage Shores and the Many Deaths of Laila Starr, Blue and Green, which won the Eisner recently, and on the Marvel DC side of things, I've written Swamp Thing, Justice League Dark, Catwoman, Venom, and now the upcoming Carnage series as well.
Oh, you're doing Carnage. That's the one thing that I miss about working in the comic shops, is being like up to date on what's coming out. That's awesome that you're doing Carnage. What a great kid.
Yeah, it was just recently announced. So yeah.
Oh yeah, congratulations. Are you a big symbiote Spidey fan? Or do you have a favorite?
Actually, originally when I was approached to work on this, I had chatted with Donnie, who was doing Venom at the time. And then the editor got in touch and I said, look, straight up, I don't have the kind of encyclopedic knowledge of these characters that you might expect people to have. I don't have a lot of background with these characters. Just because, I grew up in India, I didn't grow up reading comic books. Yeah. And the editors were kind enough to say, that's kind of why we want you on here, is we want you to bring new ideas, new perspectives. And it's something that, I've kind of become known for, especially with these kinds of properties. Yeah.
One of the things that's really interesting to me is something you just mentioned. You grew up in India, as you said, and you didn't have Western. I guess it doesn't sound like you read Western comics. So how did you make that transition? Or it sounds like you started writing comic books as an adult into 2015. How did you get there, and what were you consuming as a kid? What informed your?
It's not that I wasn't reading Western comics. I was just reading very different Western comics than that. I was reading more of the European stuff, Asterix and Tintin, and there were reprints of a lot of the sort of old. I don't know what the publisher was over here, but basically Phantom, Mandrake. Flash Gordon, those guys. So that's the kind of stuff that I grew up reading, and there were Indian comics as well that I read, which were in local languages. So it's not that I had no exposure to comics. It's just that Marvel DC stuff was like a very, very small portion of what I read.
Yeah.
And then at some point, my father took away all my comics and said, you have to start reading like proper books now. I mean, obviously he didn't know what comics were capable, but I believed that. I said, yeah, okay, comics are for kids. Went over to the US, and then I was studying to be a chemical engineer, and a friend of mine gifted me volume 1 of Sandman, and that thing just, it was like taking a book and slapping me in the face.
Yeah.
That thing like really opened my mind, opened my eyes in terms of what comics could be. And it was really at that point that, somewhere in my brain, there must have been a small voice that said, oh, I wish I could write comics one day.
Yeah, well, you did it, man. Your stuff's great. Your first book you said was Black Moon. What was it? Black Moomba?
Yeah. I self-published an anthology of 4 short stories set in Mumbai.
Okay.
Black and white crime noir stories without any actual crime. So it's just like existential noir of living in Mumbai, if you will. Yeah, that one. I was actually in the UK studying creative writing at that point. I quit chemical engineering in 2012, 2013. I've done a few things, few comics, few stories in India as well. And I was getting to that point where, I said, okay, if I actually put some serious effort into this, I might be able to make a career out of it. So moved to the UK, studied creative writing. Toward the end of that second year, I started putting together this kind of anthology of stories, all with artists that I knew from having made a few comics back in India.
Yeah.
And yeah, that we kickstarted that, raised way more money than I thought we would. Like we raised close to £12,000 or something.
Yeah.
For a first time Kickstarter, first time comic maker person. Then published that as a hardcover, and did quite well. And I sent that out to creators and editors who were in the industry, people that I admired, and that opened a lot of doors for me.
Who gave you your call back? Who was the person that
well, I got lots of stories about this one. So one of the first creators that I showed the book to was Gillan, who was at Thought Bubble the year I met Eric Stephenson at Image, which is where I did my sort of next known book, if you will. And while I was pitching my idea to Eric, Kieran randomly stops by the table and says, "Eric, you should listen to Ram, Eric," and then walks away. He says not a word more than that, but I imagine that was very useful, because at the time I think Wicked and Divine was one of Image's more successful books. So that was one of the sort of big open doors for me. And then I remember giving the book to Jamie Rich, who was Vertigo editor at DC at the time.
Okay.
And he took the book. He was very nice. He didn't get back to me for at least a year and a half. It was his assistant editor at the time, and editor now, Brittany Holzer, who read the book, and she passed it on to him and said, "You need to look at this." And then I remember Jamie sending me a text at 3 a.m. in the morning UK time from the train to San Diego. He's like, "Hey man, I'm on the train to San Diego. I just read Black Moomba, and I shouldn't have slept on it for so long. So we should talk." I talked about doing some Vertigo stuff with him, and it seemed like it was gonna happen. And then he emailed me one day going like, "I'm no longer at Vertigo, so I'm sorry, but it's not gonna happen." So I was a bit disappointed with that. And then a week later, he's like, "I'm actually Batman editor now. Do you want to come write a Batman story?" I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I can do that. No problem."
That's awesome. Have you, in your career, have you ever had, sort of like the promise of getting to work on a particular IP on the horizon, and then had that pulled back from you? I know I've heard that frequently with creators that, they get all jazzed to start a pitch on new story arc for an existing character, a new character, and then done. Has that ever happened to
I've
you?
never had that happen.
That's good.
But I've always proposed. I know I've proposed pitches that for one reason or the other, editors love them, everybody loves them, and then like that editor quits.
Ooh.
Or like the publishing plan changes, and there's been stuff like that has happened. But I'm learning over these past few years that that's the norm with sort of these large publishing houses. So
yeah,
I've taken it in my stride.
I love that. I love that's like one of those like lessons you've learned already, or that you're learning. What are some other big things that you just didn't even think would come up before you started like jumping into the work processes of these bigger corporations?
I mean, largely with the bigger corporation stuff. In fact, if I've learned anything, it is how close it is to the approach of making something yourself. I think inherently comics still continues to be this kind of very driven by personal tastes and ambitions kind of thing. And so you imagine if you're going to DC or Marvel, and you go in and you're like, oh, this is how I want to make this comic. I always thought it would be a case of no, Ram, be quiet. This is how we've done it for years. Yeah. This is how it's going to be. But it's not true. That has been the biggest revelation to me, is if I go to an editor and I say, I have this crazy idea that no one's tried in like 10 years, will you let me do it? If it is sort of possible, and if I can get people to back me on it, then people will do it. And that's always an exciting thing about working in any creative medium for me, is there are no rules. Like, you can come in and you can do interesting new things.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I would have thought it would have been the other way around, just like you come in with a cool idea and they're like, well, actually, that's a really cool idea, but we have to have Doom. We have to have Dr. Doom in here. So I need you to put it.
But I'm not talking on that level of things. I mean, I can understand, we have to have this character, or you can't use this character. That's always part of the greater narrative. I mean stuff like, writing Swamp Thing in seasons, for example. Which is not a thing that was previously done. There's always, you pitch like an ongoing 50-issue arc, or you do a mini.
Yeah.
No one's ever, I don't think outside of a few examples here and there, I don't think people have come in and gone, hey, we're going to do 10-issue seasons, and we're going to do it just the way TV does it, in that if the 10 issues go well, then you renew us for another season. And I think that's an interesting format change. I think it makes the story work differently as well. So it's more stuff like that.
Also, I appreciate that approach. I feel like it saves us as fans from having to slog through 40 issues of filler story or stuff that's just there to maintain the status quo. When I picture like working for a big corporation, the scenarios I more imagine are the one that's like, oh, Bob and legal here, I don't know if we can, like you have so many voices coming in trying to guide your creative process, but that sounds like that's not really the case. So that is super interesting.
But and also I think creators have to have enough confidence and enough wherewithal and knowledge about their own craft to go, I will listen to you, I will not listen to you, because your advice makes sense, your advice makes no sense.
Right.
So I think that is very much up to you as an individual and as a creator, what advice you take on board.
Speaking of knowledge of craft, this is a little bit of a departure from the previous conversation. As much as I know our listeners would love to know about the machinations of corporate development, which I'm sure everybody likes. Actually, why wouldn't they enjoy that? It's just really interesting in terms of the comic industry. But anyway, I listened to a workshop you gave, which I thought I'm an aspiring comic writer. I'm working on my own thing, so I was listening. I'm like, I wonder how, because your stories are so interesting and not like really anything I've read before. So I was like, how is he coming up with this stuff? One of the things that you said. That also mirrors something that Jeff Lemire said in his Substack is for you, a story starts a lot of times with and you please correct me if I'm sure I'm misquoting you, but the gist that I got was sometimes it just starts with an image. And then you're like, okay, well, I really want to play with that image. I really want to work it into story. How can I build something around it? Can you expound on that? Like, how do you come up with the things that you do? I mean, I know that's a really broad question, but
I'm going to start with an equally sort of broad and tangential answer.
Mhm.
I think a lot of what it means to come up with something has a lot to do with consuming stuff. So I see a lot of people who are like, oh, I only read comics. I don't read too many novels. Or I'm like, oh, I read 2 books all of last year.
Mhm.
You're never going to come up with interesting stuff if that's what you're doing. You have to constantly read, consume, watch film, listen to music, go out, I don't know, in the middle of Denmark and live in a forest and don't see anyone for 10 days, you know, just do stuff that makes you reflect on the act of gathering through personal experience and personal perspective,
Mhm.
um, your idea of this world. And then once you have that, you obviously also just have all kinds of, for lack of a better word, like detritus from having watched and consumed these things. And it'll just be sitting there until there's so much stuff that gathers in your head that eventually you start seeing, amid that chaos, you start seeing the shape of something. You go like, oh, wait, there's a story here. Like I can't, and you're right, you know, sometimes a story will start with an image, but it'll be all kinds of weird things. Like sometimes a story will start with me going like, oh, what would be, this song would make a really cool sort of title track for a film.
Oh, yeah.
And then my brain will just go, what film would it be a great title track to? Story, you know? And sometimes, you know, it'll be from reading like a newspaper article. I read an article about this kind of iron meteorite that had fallen somewhere in Greenland, and a British explorer at the time went and found this meteorite and basically stole it from those people and brought it over to the UK, not knowing that it was the only source of iron for that whole tribe. So while they had been one of the most advanced people at the time because they were already making and using iron implements, the moment he took that meteorite away, they were like, oh, we don't know how to make tools anymore.
Oh, man.
And it just caused this kind of massive shift, demographic shift in a people, just the act of taking this rock away, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but reading stuff like that gives you ideas for stories all the time as well. So it's just a matter of, I think, consuming enough and training your brain to look for the shapes of stories within within the hoarder mentality brain that you have, where you just gather a bunch of stuff and keep it there.
Yeah. The example you brought up during that specific, oh boy, I should have rewatched it or something. The example that you brought up during that specific workshop was you talked about Mel Gibson making Apocalypto, I believe. And he was like,
yeah, and it was, he wanted to make a chase movie set in, like, not set in a city, set in the wild, and he wanted to make a chase movie, but he was like, we got to do something other than cars. And to go from that to making Apocalypto, which, if you now think about it, is actually a chase movie where it's just people chasing each other rather than cars. But yeah, it's weird stuff like that always sticks with me in terms of, like, so genuinely interesting ideas can just come from anywhere. And I think the really important thing is to consume enough stuff so you can find this kind of creative ocean from which to pull stuff.
I like that because it validates all my life choices to read and watch and listen to everything.
I don't know if it validates all
and
my
I think
choices.
I mean, so I think you've got the hard part covered. Now you just got to train yourself to look for the shape of stories in there. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
I mean, if you think about it, it's what sculptors do as well.
Mm.
They
Mhm.
will look at these giant pieces of rock that no one sees any value in, and then someone will go like, "I'll take that piece because I can see this shape inside of it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the skill part of it, if you will.
Right on. I just reread a little bit of your work last night just to kind of prepare for our chance to talk. And
Sure.
Graffity's Wall. How personal is that story for you? Is that just a work of fiction, or I mean, I know it's influenced by your geographical location for your upbringing and maybe some friends that you had, but how personal is that book for you?
Well, before you answer that
Yeah.
specifically, can you or Kevin, if you can, just give a brief synopsis of what Graffity's Wall is about, just so people are on the same page?
Yeah. Do you want to let's let the master do it. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Ron.
I mean,
Give us
Grafity's
a little synopsis.
Wall is the story of 4 young people growing up in the city of Mumbai with different creative aspirations as to who they want to be. There's a graffiti artist, there's a writer, there's a kid who wants to be a rapper, and there's a girl who wants to be an actress. And what follows are these anecdotal chapters that are loosely
Mhm.
connected, but also function as individual stories,
Mhm.
looking at their lives, but also looking at how the city that they live in both inspires them and impedes them in equal measure. And really, I suppose it is to say that any kind of creative endeavor coming to fruition in any way is a triumph of the human spirit, especially if you grow up in difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what that book is about. It is personal in that a lot of things that are around the narrative are true and from my personal experiences.
Okay.
But it'll be indirect stuff. It'll be stuff like, there's a scene where there are 2 characters talking, and the grandmother talks about looking at her sort of balcony and seeing kids playing cricket in
Mhm.
the sun in the afternoon. And that is like an image straight out of where I used to live when I was a kid. My parents both worked, so I'd go stay at my neighbor's place until they came back from work, and my neighbor's balcony sort of looked out over this playground where the kids would just play
Yeah.
in like the scorching heat
Yeah.
in the afternoon. But yeah, so it's stuff like that. There's a
Okay.
scene where there's a grandmother who dries these kind of rice patties on a sheet of
Right.
plastic in the sun, and then it's a very traditional Indian thing. You get spicy rice patties that you then fry and you make papadums out of.
Mm.
And that's so it's like weirdly tangential stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the narrative itself is crafted from scratch. So.
Okay, gotcha. You always wonder when you read stories like that where you have such well-developed and rounded, well, not rounded, but well-developed characters that is the creator writing themselves into this, Have you ever had anything that you've worked on that has
Ooh.
had more of like a personal sort of inflow from you, like you've given it more of who you are and your own personal experience, or has it mostly been
I mean, I think
in
everything
the
I've done
details?
has
Yeah.
had that kind of. I only put personal stuff in the details because
It feels like it. Yeah.
I mean, I think also the joy of good writing
Hmm.
is in the details.
Mhm.
Like
Totally.
coming up with a plot is not writing.
Right.
Coming up with details of
Yeah.
the words that you use, what you choose to show, every little thing you put in the scene.
Hmm.
Like that's where good writing and good storytelling is. And so I think
Yeah.
putting your personal experiences in the details is at least the way to go for me.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, like I got personal details in Swamp Thing, I got personal details in Graffiti
Yeah.
Wall, I've got personal details in Laila Starr. So almost all of my work has some measure of personal touches here and there.
Would
That's
you
awesome.
say you're interested in the theme of like the city as a character? It seems like that's come up a couple of times.
Yeah, I think it has been a preoccupation for a long time. Also because probably the formative, intellectually formative years of my life were spent among a bunch of architects. And so we're always talking about urban locations and buildings and spaces as sort of integral parts of the organism that is urban humanity, if you will. And so the spaces we occupy have ideas and lives and interests and inclinations of their own. They're not always what we intend. So I think that has been a preoccupation for a really long time. I've only ever lived in big cities as well. So I naturally sort of tend to think about places that way.
I love that. And like, how would you describe, I mean, you've done it already, but for us, how would you describe like the character of Mumbai, for example?
I mean, if I could describe it in a sentence like that, then I would do it, and I would not write a story about it. I think the idea is that it is so complex and nuanced, but the fact that you get it, like, not once in the story have I ever said that, oh, Mumbai is actually a character who was like this.
Right.
But the fact that you leave at the end of that story with the feeling of like, oh, I know this kind of city, I know what this city is to an extent. I think that is a success of writing fiction. And if I could condense it into a sentence, then there would be no point, or there would be no catharsis to writing that fiction.
Yeah, I also have such an interest in that. My background is in Russian literature, and Dostoevsky loved the city as a character and how it was sort of oppressive, and the machinations of the city kept people down, and it was the struggle of the everyman and you couldn't.
Also, I mean, that relates in a very interesting way to the Russian outlook on urban architecture.
Yeah.
Right. So this kind of tendency to go functional repetition, like the entire promenades of the same unit of architecture being repeated over and over again. Such an oppressive thing to do. Whereas, if you look at a city like Barcelona, it is totally not like that. And so I think that reflects in the character of the city. So I think it would take an unusual perspective to write Barcelona as an oppressive city, whereas I can totally see how Dostoevsky's influence comes from there. So I find that to be very interesting as well, especially also reading Jerusalem from Alan Moore. He's talking about Northampton. Like, that is very much Alan Moore's Northampton and his perspective and his insider's view of the city. And so that city as character is very different from, any Northampton that I could experience if I went there for a week.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because a city changes, of course, depending on who you are. Like, if you go to, I don't know, Rio, if you're one type of person, the sort of Warrens of the favelas is your city. Yeah. But if you're another type of person, it's a beach. And I just love that different perspective.
Yeah, and also, I think spaces change depending on who you are, even though geographically and physically they remain the same. Like, I remember the scene in Drive where they drive through these abandoned canals, and somewhere in LA, I imagine they are. And yeah, for them it's an abandoned canal. For you, it's an abandoned canal. And then you think of, at least I would think of similar places in Philly that were abandoned and then were taken over by skateboarders and people riding BMXs. And to them, it's an entirely different function. It's an entirely different place. And the culture of those people and their experience of that space changes entirely depending on how you approach it. If I go like I'm going to an abandoned canal, the way I perceive that space is very different from I'm going to skateboard on these like incredibly inclined walls,
Yeah, definitely. So one of my other favorites that you wrote that was actually coming out while I was working at the comic shop was These Savage Shores. That book was and is, I think, currently still on the list of top selling books in the shop. Like, it took zero effort to get that into people's hands and get them to buy into what you were selling. I mean, it's a bold title. It's a crazy take on a genre that I don't know if it's even a genre that existed before, dealing with like colonialism through the lens of like a vampire monster story.
I don't think that's the genre. I think the genre is just period vampire fiction.
Period vampire.
That has existed for years. Yeah.
Fair. It's just different. Like Chris said earlier, your stuff is always, it's just different. Like, I've never read anything like most of the stories that I've read that you've written. And These Savage Shores was no different. What was the big influence? I mean, it's kind of obvious what the influence is because of where it stemmed from, but like the use of the 9-panel grid that you used in the storytelling in that book was just, I mean, people would flip open the first couple pages and be like, yeah, I'll take this. I want to read it. It didn't take much.
Yeah, I'm glad. And I mean, I think if you think about what the book is doing on that sort of bigger colonial theme, is to take the sort of imperialist idea of what they did in these countries, and then to go, no, this is what it really is. So I'm taking something that you are familiar with, which is, of the British Empire and the Raj, and I still run across people here in the UK who are like, well, the empire actually did a lot of good things. I'm like, I'm not sure trading a couple of million lives for like building a decent railway can be considered like a good thing. But the endeavor is to take that concept and go like, here's a mirror or a lens that you have never seen it through, right? And then that sort of philosophy translates to how the book is written, in that it takes a 9-panel grid and then it says, look, here's a way you've not seen it used. And then it takes the epistolary nature of Bram Stoker's Dracula and says, here's a story you've never seen told with this format. And so I think that kind of thematic repetition is also something that I really enjoy and I really like doing in creative mediums. You can see it in Laila Starr as well. The fact that every issue is really a completely self-contained story. In that the story lives and dies within each issue.
Literally.
Just as Laila lives and dies within each issue. And so I think that kind of conceptual repetition is I don't know, exciting to me to execute as a creator.
I cannot tell you how much I love the mini deaths of Laila. When I first read it, we read a lot of comics. We work at a comic book company. Kevin worked at a comic book shop for half a decade. It's so refreshing just to come across something where you're like, I don't know if I could explain this. I live in San Francisco, and one of the things that we do here, because we're tech, whatever, we always say, it's like Uber for pizza or whatever. Like, you always try to find some way to translate, and I don't know how to translate your work. Like, I don't know how to tell somebody, it's like the Goonies.
I mean, I'll take that as a point of pride. Is
absolutely
truly original work is not easily translatable, and so I pitch stuff to Hollywood execs every now and then, and there's always this kind of, what's the log line? What's it like? Oh, you mean it's like this? And in my brain, at least, even if I'm not verbalizing it each time, I'm just going like, no, why does it have to be like anything else? Like, are we so jaded that we truly believe there's no originality left anymore?
Totally. So, I think people are so used to those shortcuts, right? Like, the human mind makes these heuristics so it doesn't have to work so hard, right? It saves like whatever this biological energy that it takes to.
I don't know if you guys watched the film Pig with Nicolas Cage. Yeah. So I mean, based off of the trailer, I think the first instinct for everyone is to go like, oh, it's John Wick but with a pig.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you watch the film and you're like, there's no way you can condense this into a log line like that.
That's so funny that you said it, because I just watched Pig and somebody was like, somebody said that exact same. It is John Wick with a pig, and I was sitting there watching. I'm like, Nick Cage is, a spoiler alert for people who haven't seen it, John Wick, for everybody listening, John Wick goes and kills everybody who killed his dog, right? He just goes and kills everyone. It's a vengeance tale. Nick Cage gets his pig stolen, And I'm like, okay, for the next 2 hours, I'm about to watch Nick Cage, who lives in this like a swamp, like the woods. He's got this wood man. He's, a lumberjack or whatever. He's like a guy of the woods. I'm like, I'm about to go watch him enact some seriously medieval revenge on people. And that is not what happens. And so it is not John Wick with a pig.
It is the diametrically opposite thing to what actually happens. And so I think in seeing that, it is, and really how much joy did that bring? Like, to me, I was 100% expecting to see, like, all right, fine, he's going to go beat up some people now. Mm-hmm. And then the sheer joy and going like, no, this is completely original.
Oh man.
And at least when I go to write things, like I want to feel that joy in creating something like that, is here's a thing that you thought was going to be one thing. You know, Laila Starr, everyone thought it was going to be, I don't know, Neil Gaiman's Death, the High Cost of Living, or it was going to be Day Tripper. But it's not. It's its own thing. It's its own unique narrative. And I think there's a kind of playful joy in doing that consistently. I've been doing that since Black Mamba. Like I said, it's crime noir, and then you start reading, you realize, wait, there's no actual crime in any of these pages. So I find kind of joy in playing with people's expectations like that.
I mean, it seems like you're getting an opportunity to do that a lot more recently with some of these more established IPs that you've been working on, like Catwoman and Venom and things like that. Like, how do you retell the story, or not retell the story, but tell your own story with all of that history and baggage? Has that been a struggle at all for you with the Marvel DC sort of titles as opposed to your own personal work?
No, not really. In that, the first question I ask whenever I get approached to work on one of these is like, okay, what do I have to say about this story and this character that hasn't been said before? And a particularly poignant example with that is Swamp Thing. In that,
so good.
It has been the subject of such a incredible series of lauded runs in the past. You would, and very intelligent runs in the past. You would think that there isn't a lot to be said, but there always is. I mean, that's the beauty of being human, right? Like the brain is an infinite thing of infinite thinking possibilities. And when we first started that one, I know there are a number of people who are like, oh man, no Alec Holland, I'm not following this series. To like 6 issues in, and the number of people who reached out and gone like, I thought this was gonna be bad because it didn't have Alec Holland in it, but actually this is pretty good. So I think again, it plays with the medium's expectations, right? Like you expect that, oh yeah, if we've changed, like this legacy character is going to be bad. Doesn't have to be. You can do something new with it. You can do something interesting with it.
Yeah.
A lot of people very, very flatteringly have compared like things in the run to things that Alan Moore did. But if you actually think about it from a philosophical standpoint, it is kind of doing the opposite of what Alan Moore did. And yet doing it in a style that feels intimately familiar to that kind of Swamp Thing story, in that Moore probably was investigating the idea of a creature that is searching for a way to be human. Whereas in my Swamp Thing run, I'd like to think it's a story about a human being rediscovering what it is to be human by becoming a creature. So in some ways it is diametrically opposite to what Moore did, and yet you can tell interesting, engaging stories with completely opposing points of view.
Interesting.
I love it. Did you know that the series was going to be extended by a few issues, or was that as big a surprise to you as it was to the fans?
No, I mean, we pitched it that way. That we said, if it's good, give us a season 2. And I think by the time we hit issue 8 or so, the numbers were good on the series. The book had done better than
Yeah.
a lot of people had expected it to, and we were having conversations about extending it. But the nature also of working in comics is that you have conversations, then 4 months go by, and then somebody takes a decision. So
Yeah.
it took a while to get there, but I suppose at least the creative team and the editors always knew that it was
That's
going
what
to
you
get
wanted.
there. So yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Speaking
congratulations, man. Well deserved.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of the big two, well, I guess it doesn't have to be a big two, but is there a? It doesn't even have to be a comic book character, but is there ever
Sorry.
any? Oh, go ahead.
My doorbell's going off, so I can't hear you. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Is there a character that you have always wanted to write that is not an original character, like that you would just kill for the chance to write?
No, I always get asked this question. I always give like the most disappointing answer, which is I don't think about characters. I think about stories.
Think about stories.
And so I don't have like, I don't spend my time going like, oh, which Marvel character would I write if by some hypothetical reason someone got in touch and said, it's such a weirdly hypothetical thing to do. Like I don't have time to do that either.
Yeah.
Whereas I would much rather go like, oh, I have this story that I would write, and it would have these characters in it, or I have a Green Lantern idea, or so there, it's more the excitement of having an idea associated with a character or with a certain set of characters, rather than having some kind of attraction towards the character in itself.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So I get equally excited about having story ideas for big characters that are read by hundreds of thousands of people, and then I get equally excited about going to an editor and go like, here's a character no one's seen for 55 years. I would like to write a story with that character.
Yeah, like if you had the recent episode of Peacemaker, the DC show, they referenced Matter Eater Lad, which is this little used villain, and I'm like, man, I would love to hear more about Matter Eater Lad.
Some deep cuts in that show.
Yeah.
So like I think another we've only got 5 minutes left, so we've got some questions from our users that I want to dig into in a second. But I also think it's just important, like how do you feel about? I mean, you really have become one of the most unique auteurs of contemporary comics, in my opinion, in like the last 5 years. It's such a quick rise, in my opinion. I guess it might not be to other people. How does that? How have you like been dealing with that?
The way I've been dealing with it for 5 years, which is, oh, good, people are enjoying what I'm doing. I'm gonna put my head down and do more of it.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
It's that simple. You're just like, well, I'm gonna keep doing it then.
I mean, it's also what sort of got me in the door in the first place. I didn't go and network with people. I didn't, build a Twitter profile and talk about my work. I made a book and I gave it to editors, and they enjoyed it and they got in touch with me.
Yeah.
And I imagine all that's happening now is a similar thing, but on a bigger scale, where my work is the thing that people enjoy and are attracted to. And so it would be foolish of me to do anything other than just produce more interesting work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
hope that it keeps happening. I'll keep reading it.
Amazing. All right, let's dig into these. Sorry to interrupt. Want to dig into these user questions real quick?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Somebody asks, when will these Savage Shores be coming to a screen?
You'd have to ask Vault. The way that's structured, that all that depends on them. So I haven't really been looking at that.
Somebody has sort of a follow-up asks, is there any of your other independent work currently in talks for being moved to a big visual screen medium?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everything I've done is in some point of that sort of conversation. So, cool. Some of the things are further along than others, but I've been lucky in that pretty much all of my work is at least being considered, talked about, picked up for various kinds of adaptations.
Mhm.
Hopefully, be in a position to announce things in the near future, but
Yeah.
also in general, like I have a lot of interest in working in different mediums. So we're also trying to see if that adaptation is executed by me as well.
Yeah, out of curiosity, are you worried about Alan Moore famously hates all adaptations of his work? Are you worried about that happening to you?
No, because I don't, and I have this kind of odd detachment. I won't say I don't care about the work after it's left my desk, but I care much less about the work after it's left my desk. In that, hey, you know what? If you're gonna pay me tons and you don't want me involved, then whatever you paid me is worth me walking away from and letting you do whatever you want to do. Great. But given the way things are currently with the industry and with the value of writers to all of these mediums, yeah, I don't see the point in cordoning myself off from adaptations of my work. I think I would enjoy writing for film or TV. I think I would enjoy writing for radio plays, games, all of those things. And so if I have the ability to do that, then I will pursue that. But not out of any kind of possessive attachment to the work. In fact, my view on stories, I don't, aside from the Alan Moore stuff, like I don't know what he thinks about stories, but I don't believe in being possessive about stories. I think the great joy of stories is that they mutate, they change, they develop into things that have a will of their own. And so I'm always excited by other people picking up, adapting, aping, changing, emulating stuff that I've done before. So.
All right, we got one more, I guess. We're about out of time here. So one of our questions that we ask every creator we talk to, and some hate this question, some think it's great. So hopefully you can answer in the way that's most palatable for you, because you'll understand once I ask it. Is we're called Shortbox. So our idea is the question is sort of the desert island question. Which 5 stories? It could be a single issue of a comic book, or a trade paperback, or an omnibus, or a run, or whatever, pretty lax on the rules. Which 5 stories would you take with you on a desert island to be stuck with for eternity?
Rather than all the desert island stuff, because if I'm on a desert island and I'm stuck for all eternity, I have more important and pressing concerns. Right. But I'll put it this way: the 5 books that I go back to the most.
Nice.
When I sort of try to inspire myself again, obviously Sandman is right in there, amid the top 5, if you will. There's Miller and Mazzucchelli's Year One. I think it's one of those books. Azzarello's 100 Bullets. Azzarello and Riso, 100 Bullets. Was probably a big pull there. Love and Rockets, pretty much all of it. Is it that ought to keep me occupied on a desert island for quite some time?
Yeah, totally.
And then there are books that I could keep going, but they'll probably change. But I think these are the books that I go back to the most. Probably Miller's Ronin is another book that I keep going back to as well. And that's just covering like American comics. Like we haven't even gotten into Asterix and Tintin yet. Right. And I could probably find like Tintin and the Blue Lotus, probably another book that I would keep going back to over and over again. So there's just way too many. Ask me again, in a year, and I'll give you a completely different answer.
Deal.
I'll set that interview up now. I'll ask you in a year.
Great.
I guess that's the end. I obviously I could do this all day. So many questions. But thank you so much for taking the time to
My
join.
pleasure.
I know you got so much to do. So we're really grateful.
Yeah, I've got to send off 5 pages of a script within an hour and a half of us ending this interview. So
get after it. Well, we are we did get some hardcovers of Graffity's Wall from Dark Horse that we'll be giving away to some members of our Discord community. So again,
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Ram. It's been awesome chatting with you, man.
Yeah, my pleasure entirely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, last question. What do you got coming up? Anything we should be looking out for?
I think there will be a slew of announcements between now and 3 months from now.
Okay.
So we'll wait for that. But essentially, although at any point over the past year I've had like maybe 4 series on the go, including Creator On, I've actually been working on like 6 or 7 at the same time.
Wow.
So we're about to see some of those books finally come to a point where I can talk about them. So
Can't wait.
All right.
it's all super exciting stuff.
I mean, I'm out of Laila Starr and I'm rereading it, and so I'm just like, I need more. All right, we're gonna head out now. Thanks, Ram. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, brother.